Hey there, I'm Ann Teagarden, and this is the Unveiled podcast. And I'm doing something a little different today. I have the pleasure of interviewing author Kim Gordon, who has written a new book, Helper, Rescuer, Defender, Praying as the Wife God Made You to Be. And I'm enjoying this book, and I'm excited to introduce it to you. Now, Kim is not only an author, but she is first and foremost a Jesus lover. And you're going to love her accent. She's a Kentucky girl, wife to Stuart, mama and bonus mama to amazing young adults, and dog mom to Pearl and Penny. She was a registered nurse for 30 plus years, hospice nurse for over a decade, teacher, coach, and entrepreneur. And she happens to be a new friend of mine. And I can honestly say that she loves people. She loves investing in people, helping them see themselves as Jesus does, encouraging them and inspiring them. So I'm excited for you to meet her. I can also say she's very passionate about prayer. And in her own words, she runs on faith, love, and probably grits. So thank you, Kim, for joining us and telling us about your book. So what inspired you to write this book?
Hey, Ann. Well, thank you so much for that sweet introduction. Um, yeah, so the book was written in complete obedience to God. Stuart and I were separated at the time, not maritally separated, but because of his work situation, he was in a different state working. And I felt really wasted through that time because I love doing things with and for my family, with and for my husband, with and for community. And so, I kept going to God with this, just beating my head against the wall, right? It was just one of those times. And he kept saying, Kim, just do what you're already doing, right? And eventually I heard a little more clearly, just write what you're already doing. Well, what I was doing was praying for my husband, right? We were both um, uneasy and certainly not at peace with the situation. I always laugh and tell people that we actually like to be together. So it was difficult
That's
being
good.
apart, but it was written, in direct obedience to God. It was not written in the beginning to publish. Um, God has rolled that forward in a beautiful way and done what He's wanted to do in making it a book.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing it with us. I love how you describe the role of wife as helper and not just the cook and house cleaner sort of helper. And you actually went back to the original Hebrew word ezer. I think that's how it's pronounced. And
Yes.
I'm going to just read a little excerpt here. Ezer depicts the image of a rescuer, helper, and defender, shield, of an ally who comes running heroically to a cry for help. And I really like that word ally. And you also quote here theologyofwork.org. They use the word Ezer to describe women by overturning that idea of simple subordinates to men and instead offers the overture that woman was not created to serve man, but to serve with the man. And I think that's one thing we like to teach is that teamwork, and I like that word ally. So, how did you discover that, and how has that made a difference for how you think about the role of a wife?
Yeah, well, during this time of intense prayer, and long, very long periods of time of prayer, what happens, I think what prayer is so primarily about is about our own relationship with God, right? So, God will challenge you in those times and he will show you and reveal to you he's faithful and good to show us things that we need to take the next step. And so, I began to do some research when I realized that in multiple scriptures that the woman is more than, it seemed like more than just a sidekick, right? More than just an assistant. And I think that that gets really confusing, especially in our culture today. We are meant to be so much more. Truly, at the time of creation of man, God sat back, right, and really lauded himself, right, about how well he had created man. But he said only one thing is missing, and that's the helper. But when I realized that the same word that he uses to describe the woman in the garden is the woman that, or I'm sorry, is the word that he uses to describe himself in the way that he helps us, runs to us, and is an ally for us. I just think that's amazing.
It's beautiful. It really is. And I think that can give us a whole new mindset about our role. And so I really appreciate your introduction. It's not only the prayers, but you have this great introduction about our role. I liked also, when I was reading through these, I've been going through them, praying them for my husband. And one of them really caught my attention the other day, where you said, sometimes our attitudes stink, triggers are snatched, negative emotions can flare up in a heartbeat. Help us, Lord, both to realize that we have natural differences physiologically and emotionally, and that our backgrounds and experiences influence how we respond to circumstances. And you go on, and it's a great prayer. But what I liked about it, one, was it shows you're real, you have triggers and sometimes negative attitudes. We all deal with that. So Kim is not the perfect wife who's,
No,
telling you how
I
to
know.
do this. There's real stuff happening in her house. So I really appreciated that. I also appreciated that it wasn't just praying for my husband, it was praying for us. It's praying for me. As I pray these for my husband, it also experience how, okay, I need to ask God to help with my attitudes as well. So as you've been praying these, how long have you been praying these for your husband, and what kind of changes have you seen?
I've been praying them the entire time we've been married, since actually in a form before we were married. Stuart and I have a crazy, wonderful story. Not time for that today, but it is. We met later in life, and so I've prayed these prayers over him since the beginning, because we did make the decision to have a marriage of three chords, right? Three strands that would not easily be broken. And that was the idea from the beginning. The things that I have seen happen from these prayers have just been astounding. And my eyes get teary when I begin to think about that. Because what I've seen in me is as much as what I've seen in him. You know, the the change, the depth, increasing depth of the relationship between me and God in a similar role. See, God knows how I feel as the Ezer in this relationship, because He is also Ezer to me, right? So that depth of my relationship. The other thing that's happened with me is seeing my husband very differently, um, getting closer to God's vision of my husband rather than just seeing him through my own filters,
Right.
which can be deceptive, right?
Right. I think that's
And
real important. Mhm.
yeah, it is. And aside from that, the differences, the changes that I've seen in my husband have been just astonishing. And in his words, right?
Mhm.
I heard him telling someone the other day that his relationship has grown closer to God, that he has learned to pray for himself, right? Where he felt before that he didn't have um, the maybe authority or the relationship with God to afford him the ability to pray um, without being led by someone else or by me, right?
Mhm.
And those are amazing things. I've also seen, he was most definitely a believer
Mhm.
prior to these prayers, but seeing him begin to really live out his relationship with God and walk with Jesus has been beautiful.
That's great. And you may have already answered this, but how do you think it's changed your relationship overall?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, we listen to each other differently. We view each other differently.
Mhm.
Again, not just from our own perceptions and filters, but
Mhm.
there's an entrance as we pray and open up to God's vision for our marriage. There's an entrance of His vision of
Mhm.
what that other person's doing. See, we have that tendency to think that, oh, that little idiosyncrasy or that thing that they do, it's just done to irritate me. And, like you said before, normal household over here, those flares can go up in a heartbeat,
Right.
right? But, you begin to see each other differently as you pray into the Spirit and allow God to show you things.
Yes. And I know that you wrote these specifically for your husband. So if someone is reading these and says, that doesn't really fit my husband, what would you say to them?
Good, because if so, it would be the same guy, right? Um, so, I think that, um, okay, first of all, I wrote those words in direct obedience to God. He asked me to write my prayers for my husband. So they are vulnerable, they are specific to my husband. Um, we've, first of all, a lot of women say to me, I would like to know how to pray. I don't know how to pray. I don't know the words to use. These were written just basically as examples. Okay. So we've put a reflection section on each one. We've put a little note margin on each one. So, make them specific, use them as guidelines, use them as examples, but then make them specific for your husband and for your relationship.
Yeah, that's great. And I noticed that you had like categories as well. And so again, praying protection, you can pray protection over your husband in whatever way fits the kinds of things that he may deal with on a daily basis. So I love that. What would you say to a wife who's just really struggling in her marriage and maybe doesn't feel like praying for her husband?
I would say pray anyway.
Yeah.
Pray anyway. Um, again, our prayer relationship connects us to the Father. So that's actually the perfect time. When you've got that stinky attitude that I mentioned earlier, it's the perfect time to pray and to spend time with the Father, who loves you and who loves your husband. And he is life, he is love, he is the one that can give us a pathway, to changing things within our relationship. Okay. And sometimes those changes are within ourself,
Mhm.
um, and not as much changes that we think we want to induce in the other person, right? Um, yeah. So I would say pray anyway. Pray with in a disciplined way. Pray frequently. Spend time with him every day, um, about many things, but starting with your marriage.
Yes. And I think one prayer you can start with is, Lord, how do you see my husband? And then listen for what the Lord says. I think that's a great place to start. But I agree with you that discipline of praying when you don't feel like it changes your own heart, tenderizes your own heart. And so I agree, this may be that path forward that is needed. So thank you so much, Kim, for talking to us about the book. How do people get a copy of it for themselves?
Yes, it's easy to find on Amazon. We can drop the link maybe in
Yes, I'll
the
put that in the description. Mhm.
yeah, okay, we can do that. It's also on Advantage Books website, Helper Rescuer Defender, Kim Gordon. And I would love for you to pick up a copy of my emails in that book. I would love to hear from you about how your life and marriage begin to change as you start praying for your husband and over your marriage in a different way. So, yeah.
Mhm. Thank you so much. I hope people will use it. Don't just buy it and put it on the shelf. Actually use it and pray through those. Thank you again for sharing with us, Kim. Have a great day.
Thank you, Anne.
Bye-bye.